But yeah, East Asia has,
but
I think,
not
about
in
100
Chinese
cities the same
terms.
size. No, I think there's about 20 cities the size of London here. And it's just the volume of people is crazy. So yeah, I'll be doing that. Obviously, first week, 2 weeks, probably just get acclimatized, and then family time and all that type of stuff, and then I'll start moving about a bit more.
Yeah, I don't think London makes the top 10. London's about 10 million.
10 million, I think, is about conservative,
Yeah,
right?
so it's about eight. It might be about eighth if it was a
I
Chinese
think,
city.
yeah, but it's hard to, people like to say, is it the center, is it whatever? But I think generally speaking, London is definitely top 20 in terms of population size, by far biggest in Europe. It's bigger than almost every other US city apart from, I think, LA and New York.
It's not as big as Istanbul or Moscow.
Probably is bigger than Moscow, I'd say. Istanbul's probably 20 million. I would imagine. I have this image of it being absolutely massive. So we don't know. Folks, let us know, what is the biggest city that you've been to? We want to know this. I'm in Hong Kong right now, which is a fairly big city. It's about 7 million, but it's not on the size or scale of a lot of the cities in this side of the world. So, which I'll be trying to visit a little bit in the time that I'm out here. So yeah, let me know. Okay, let's get on with the show, folks. A quick sound check as usual. In fact, my question to you is probably a good sound check. So let me know in the comments, not whether you can hear me okay, rather more what is the biggest city you've been to? And I've actually got a feeling they might not be able to hear me, mate.
I mean, Juliana's just said hello from Sao Paulo, which is before you even asked that call to action.
Before I even said, some people are saying this, which is fine, because I've changed the mics around for the purposes of this thing. So hopefully the audio is fine. Just checking on LinkedIn whether anybody can hear and see me on there. I think a few people are broadcasting this, including you, Adam. Well done on broadcasting on LinkedIn. You do this every week, which is awesome. And yeah, I can see people watching it there as well. It's cool. All right, amazing. Let's get on with it. Finn, we're going to bring you on later because obviously you're the star of the show. So we're going to do that in a bit. So we might as well just review the newsletter straight away and have a look-see as to what happened last week and what was interesting about it, mate.
Yeah, no, loads. There's a lot of bias goes into this show because I review the newsletter. And I've got absolutely limited interest in assessment and several other aspects. In fact, most other aspects of recruitment. It's nearly always marketing and engagement that I focus on. But John Vlastelica's LinkedIn post was a really interesting one because it's kind of cultural, I guess, as well. So the post was recommending you need a company-wide perspective on what you do about candidates cheating with artificial intelligence through the course of the recruitment process. And I think he did a great job of covering it from lots of different angles. And one question that he posed right in the very middle of it was, look, would we actually want to hire somebody who had access to using generative AI to complete their assessment but didn't use it? I mean, does that say they've got no gumption? Does that say that they've got no initiative? Does that say they don't know what they're doing in life? So there's a lot of different perspectives, on this subject. My personal one is people should be using it for everything. And if, obviously you don't use it to create, you don't use it for facts and figures where somebody's going to potentially go to jail if you get it wrong or going to die if you get it wrong. And you have to human curate it. But if you're not using it, yeah, you're probably inefficient.
Yeah, and I do like the idea of challenging what kind of morality it is of the person that refuses to use it or doesn't use it, because I don't think necessarily that's a good value system per se. I mean, you might just be very quite fixated on what is good or bad, like having a black and white view of the world, and resisting sort of the concept of using tools, which I think a lot of people would be fine to do. But more to the point, John Vlastelica, a great Brainfood, a wonderful person to follow, must follow, I would say, on LinkedIn. So go ahead and do that. But he's one of those that actually has made a very important point, which is no matter what you decide as a business, whether you think AI usage is right or wrong, or however which you play it, you just need to develop some sort of company-wide position on it. Because without that, you're going to get your recruiters and your hiring managers each independently making decisions, local decisions, as to what constitutes cheating or not. And you might very well have the same candidate using the same techniques getting banged out of one process because he or she is being deemed as being using tools that a recruiter decides is no bueno. But in fact, another recruiter would say, hey, that's totally fine. Absent a policy, there's no guidance to your recruitment team as to how they should behave when they're dealing with AI-enabled candidates. So I think he made a very important point. Remember that I did a LinkedIn poll on this late last year, and something like 89%, I think close to 90% of respondents said they did not have a policy on AI usage from the candidate side. So we don't have a policy. But I think we need to. And I'm going to do that poll again. One of my predictions this year is that we're going to get to at least 50% companies will have some sort of policy by the end of this year on AI usage, because I think we're going to get caught with that scenario. I think it's going to start hurting a few people there.
I can't remember if I told you this, but doing a focus group last year, and somebody told me about a data scientist who was working in her company who had just been fired after 5 months in the job, because 5 months in, they realized that this person was using generative AI to do all of their work and actually had no real data science. I don't know why that's I said on the focus group, why is that a problem? Because if they were doing their work right for 5 months because they knew how to prompt the generative AI to get the right answers, like, no problem to me.
That's a second order challenge that we're not ready to have the conversation with, but I think it leads on to trying to figure out whether, like, what are we hiring for? Are we hiring for just a tool user for AI, or are we hiring for a human being that we want to potentially, have an undefined value in the future? And it's a question we're going to ask in 2025, I think, because there's going to be lots of those scenarios where you might have a super efficient AI user that may lack fundamental knowledge, domain knowledge on the thing that they've been tasked to use. So useless without access to AI, but actually brilliant at producing the output. So what do you do?
Yeah, is it maybe some next stage thinking around skills-based hiring? And actually, we need to go to task-based hiring. Can they get the task done?
Dude, this is why I've been a critic of skills-based hiring, because ultimately skills-based hiring is great, but are we really assessing for skills, or are we assessing for the ability to pick up tools and use them? And then we start getting into things like traits analysis and IQ tests and stuff like this, which, generally speaking, we're not very comfortable with. But if we're testing people on skills, and skills-based hiring is all about real-world assessments, then where does AI feature in on this? Because it could well be it becomes a big equalizer as to who can perform on that skills-based test. It may well be anybody with access to AI can competently perform this task with 12 hours of training, let's say. In which case, what are we assessing for? Just train the people 12 hours, assess the motivation.
Do you remember when smart calculators came out and they could do all sorts of things beyond basic arithmetic? And there was a load of backlash from Jurassic Park dwellers about making use of them, and nobody does their maths. Nobody does their maths A level without without that now, because it's not about like just your mental arithmetic anymore, is it?
No, but again, there's another deeper conversation on that, which is has the use of the calculator in fact diminished our intellectual capability? Like, one of the things that is true is that our level of scientific breakthroughs has actually plateaued and started to really go downwards. Like, why is that? And there's an argument to say part of the problem maybe we have stopped training our minds because of the access to the tooling that we currently have. So in other words, we produce more output. A smart guy with a calculator or a computer can produce 100 times more output than a smart guy without a calculator or a computer, but they're not advancing their skills because their brain's not being exercised. It's like driving a car and not running a mile. And ultimately, are we going to end up in a situation where we have a problem there? Don't know. It's a TBC on that one.
Okay, so that leads me nicely onto the next one, which is the OECD report about the AI workforce. Because what you just said about the number of like scientific breakthroughs that we're having plateauing, I'm absolutely certain it's about to start spiking again because of the breakthroughs that we've had in artificial intelligence in the last couple of years, and specifically the move towards putting it into the hands of consumers, everyday people. So the OECD report said a few quite interesting things. So I would have been expecting, like with a lot of tech type jobs, I would have expected that there would have been a younger workforce who was leading in this, and there is not. I would also have expected that there was a foreign-born workforce which was leading in that, or like a high proportion of foreign-born people which were leading in that in European countries, and there is also not. So there's something a little bit different about artificial intelligence compared to other types of like data science and software engineering and those types of things. It's a big report from about late 20s, page 28 onwards, something like that. That's where like the charts and things that are quite easy to digest start. So I would skip through to about halfway through and scan all of that. Fascinating stuff. Not enough. I mean, as you would expect, not enough women in this area. That was the one like stereotypical type thing, which is the case in AI jobs.
Yeah, 100%. That's true. And they didn't ask the ethnicity question either, but I would imagine it's a very white stroke Asian type dominant field as well, which is another thing that, we need to be concerned about, particularly if we, have the ambition that these breakthrough technologies should be, shared equitably and globally with everyone on the planet. But a really interesting report. I recommend you read it. It is digestible, gets into the charts really, really soon, and it's very interesting to know what the current makeup of the AI workforce is. And by the way, if you're hiring for AI, which if you're not today, you will be soon at some point. We're talking about AI experts. I can't imagine that not being something as part of your job as a recruiter. This document is going to be really important because you need to be bringing that to your hiring manager conversations and your intake meetings and all the rest of it, and saying, what, guys, this is what it looks like. This is the global marketplace for AI skills, and this is what we've got to attack and use for. So make sure you check that out. And by the way, we are doing a 10 things you need to know on hiring for AI next month. So make sure you sign up for Brainfood Live on that. Okay, cool. Give us another one, Adam.
Well, actually, these are all simultaneously kind of moving from one into the other, because on that, around AI jobs and things like that, the Glassdoor top companies to work for report 2024. Now, my presupposition is there is a direct link between the best companies to work for, which is largely about user review, right? So it's largely here's what employees have said, right? So if they like it, I think there's a direct link between they will like it if the company is doing well, because if the company is doing well, it's probably going to treat them quite well. And I think that if you agree with that supposition, then I think I could only see two countries that were covered. It was USA, including break it down by every state, and UK. I didn't see any other countries covered. So maybe they're not prominent in any other countries. I don't know. Now, if you look at the USA, there was 6 tech businesses in the top 10. This is top 10s. 6 tech businesses, 2 professional services, 1 financial services, and In-N-Out Burger, which I think is a fast food joint. Now, if you take In-N-Out Burger out of the equation, the other 9 are all knowledge-based like industries. They're mostly tech enabled. And then if you look at the UK, there was 5 professional services. So it was a bit different. 5 professional services, 4 tech. If you include Boeing in that, that's a tech and engineering. And then 1 which was like, I can't remember what they call it here, but they call it in America senior living, like retirement homes, that type of thing. The spread of industries covered in the UK and the USA, the top 10 companies in each country, is absolutely nothing. There is not one manufacturing company in the top 10 in either country. There was not one. There's a lot of industries that are not covered at all, and I think that's quite interesting because of what you just said about, like, everything you just said about AI, and every industry's become, you're going to have to be hiring AI people in it. The UK is very well renowned as a knowledge economy. We don't really make an awful lot yet, and I'll come on to Wales in a minute because it links to another thing. But Port Talbot has, Tata Steel are closing their site, 3,000 jobs going, and it's not just those 3,000 in Tata Steel. It's going to be the other 3,000 contractors that are in there. A lot of those will go as well, and then all the downstream stuff around supply chain. From the chippy around the corner that services the people going in at lunchtime and whatever. So, I'm no economist, but there's a lot of interesting stuff in all this.
Yeah, there'll be downstream effects of this. And you know what, to be honest with you, manufacturing is just hard work though. What we've also seen is that people who...
No reward too.
Exactly, low reward and harder work, physically harder work. So we've seen this example where, companies are trying to, encourage people to join semiconductor organizations and all this type of stuff. And the salary differential is massive compared to a software company versus hardware. Software a lot more. And of course, in software, you're sitting in front of a computer, you're doing remote work, you're arguing for flexible labor, all this stuff. Actually, hardware, you are in this factory. You know what I mean? You're there. So you're losing a lot of the things that we now like. So this is why it's not such a simple thing to say, oh, we're just going to onshore these things, because there's a reason why you offshore them in the first place. It was tough work, wasn't well comped, and actually, the people didn't want to do them. So yeah, it's an interesting one.
When I said low reward, actually you took it. I was meaning like for the individual workers, and actually that is of course true. I meant for the companies themselves. I mean, it's hard to make a profit in a lot of manufacturing industries. Really hard to make a profit.
Well, mate, this
like
is why
wafer thin.
Yeah, this is why the UK and US went down the financialization route, because actually it turned out to be a lot more easy to make significant margin if your business was like information, because you didn't have any moving parts, you didn't have any capex, you didn't have all of that stuff, and that's basically the deal with the devil, so to say, that the Thatcher and Reagan made, was that, okay, let's just charge down this financialization route, give the high profit margins and all this type, and basically turn everyone towards this type of career path. But at the same time, it's led to a massive deindustrialization across those countries, which has created huge gaps, inequality, for instance, and it's also now led to political manifestation, with the rise of the right wing. But anyway,
Absolutely.
We can get into that in a different topic and a different show, because we've got to talk about tech hiring. So let's get on with this. We see Finn adding some amazing commentary into the chat. So we're going to bring him on screen, because he can create more exciting commentary as he talks to us. Folks, we actually asked Finn to do this for us, because Otta, of course, are one of the sponsors of Brainfood Live. But they're also a company that has some really interesting proprietary data on actual candidate behavior and actual employer behavior on their platform. So I've asked Finn and the data science team over at Otta, and he's actually worn on-brand equipment as well. I'm just so delighted. You never know. I'm thrilled.
Good to be here, Hung. How are you doing?
Great to see you, Finn. Finn, for the folks who didn't see you last week, can you quickly introduce yourself? Who are you? What it is you do?
Yeah, absolutely. My name's Finlay Clark. I'm the VP of Commercial at Otta. Everyone calls me Finn, so feel free to use that. We started Otta 4 years ago because people were telling us job search is soul crushing. Everyone felt like a second-class citizen, and no one was standing up for candidates. So we really tried to reduce the noise for candidates. We give candidates tailored matches, not just on the obvious things that they're looking for, but actually on things that match their ambitions and really what they're looking for cultural values from a company. And we give them jobs one at a time with great information about the company. And this means that they're making fewer but better quality applications. And for the companies, that reducing the noise works for them as well, because obviously recruiters are drowning in applications, and what we've really managed to do is get people to right, opt in and really want to apply for these companies. So we really focus on fast growth, innovative, typically tech, but not always companies. And we help them hire all over the world for not just the tech employees, but also for commercial and marketing and operational and all the rest of it. So we're currently at about 1.7 million candidates around the world, focusing on UK, USA, and Europe. So really happy to use today to go into deeper trends about our marketplace, what we're seeing, and hopefully it'll be useful for people in your audience.
Yeah, fantastic. And 2 points I want to raise here. I think firstly, the kind of the walled garden type of marketplace that you guys have, I think is going to be very powerful, particularly because it can kind of suppress the AI generated application flow that we might be seeing on the wider. It's a little bit more Wild West. I see it as if you're just pushing ads out into the wider world, and of course. The idea that you've got this dual-sided curation, which basically is there to try and winnow away the noise, which is I know is overwhelming recruiters right now. Second point, there's actually loads of recruiter jobs on otta.com. So you're actually hiring recruiters on there. And if you're watching this, folks, and you're looking for work, for instance, looking to potentially change your scene, get in there as a candidate. It seems that there's opportunities there for you. So so go crack through that and have a look see. Okay, cool. Finn, let's dive into this. I know I asked you and the team to do a bit of work and digging into state of tech recruiting in 2024. Can you give us the high level and then just take it down whatever thread you want to take it down, man?
Yeah, absolutely. So how I think I'd structured this session, and I must give kudos to the analyst team at Otta. So shout out to Talveen and Yoyi, who've been busy working on this for a couple of weeks. And what we've really done is we're a two-sided marketplace. Okay, so on the first hand, we've got 11,000 companies on Otta, and they've got thousands of jobs. So we'll talk at the beginning about what's happened to companies and jobs for the first part. The second part, we'll talk about what candidates are doing differently, because there's clearly more candidates in the market, but there's interesting trends there. And then lastly, I thought what would be interesting is to give your listeners an insight into what companies do really well on Otta, because there's a huge difference between the companies that get the bulk of the great cream of the talent and those that don't. So I'm happy to share some practical things that people can take away and implement today. So that's kind of how I thought we'd structure it, but I thought we'd start by kicking off with a little bit about companies and jobs. So one side of the marketplace. Happy to start there, Hung?
Yeah, 100%. It sounds fantastic.
Okay. So as I said a minute ago, we have 11,000 companies on the platform. Over the course, we've looked at 2023 as a whole and what's changed to where we are today at the beginning of 24. Over the last year, so almost 9,000 of those companies had a job live at one point. And I think overall, the insight that people want to know, I thought your speaker from Indeed last week was really interesting when he was saying that we've seen a 60 to 70% reduction. We're seeing something similar, not quite as pronounced, but jobs on the whole are 40% down on Otta year on year. This won't be a huge surprise. It's in line with stuff that the ONS have covered already. I think what's interesting is we look at all manner of different companies on the platform, and some industries are a lot more acutely affected than others. So you've got the ones that are most heavily affected are things like consumer brands. We've got travel and transportation, health and beauty, even science, real estate. These companies that are in this area with a tech focus have really been cutting back more than 40%. But then the least affected companies have been in areas like e-commerce, productivity, and then it won't be too much of a surprise if you're in AI or even cloud and security. You're almost kind of recession proof. These companies are nowhere near as cutting back at the same scale. In fact, many of them are growing rapidly, as you know. So the way I think about some of these trends is like something like cloud. It's a 20-year technology trend, and we're probably even about halfway through that. With AI, again, it's going to be a 20-year trend. We're just at the beginning. So I do think with these things, it's kind of like, whilst there is cyclical moments in the market, there are some industries where they're going to be growing regardless, and some areas which will obviously be more affected by this. So the other thing to call about just with regards to jobs is that we do have startups who are looking for their first 10, 15 employees on Otta, like they're trying to get to MVP. Those companies were the most heavily affected, so they really cut back, which is clear because the funding environment's radically different than it was, and obviously it's harder to hire because obviously these startups are more risky for employees. So if you're in a job and you're thinking, I want to go into a startup, now's the time where people are beginning to think, is there now the right time because of security that there just hasn't been around in the market for a little while. So that's a little bit to begin with in terms of the overall market. Overall, more people in the market, less jobs. So this is why recruiters are really having a tough time, obviously, because their teams are smaller as well, right?
Yeah, very, very interesting. I think very, very important to make the point on the different segments. There is this economic cycle happening on one side, and then, of course, individual industries, regions and industries, that be segmented further. And I think you're right. Cybersecurity is going to be on the up and up. There's no question that that's a super growth, recession-proof industry. That's you can bank your bottom pound or dollar on that. You can think about things like green tech, maybe. Maybe you can think about anything related to new material sciences. All those types of things are in where the future economies are going to get built. Then you're in great shape. But overall trend is going to be is tough for lots of reasons, and the startup side, we know where the VC investment has been. That's been I think down by about 50%. So correspondingly, we should see at least 50% downfall of job posted by those companies, because that investment would, of course, go to recruitment as nothing else to buy at that point. So very, very interesting. Were there any regional trends? Are you able to spot that at Otta? Or is it? I mean, are they like, oh, Bristol's doing great, or is it sort of? Not are you not comfortable making those type of statements?
It's probably less regional in the UK. I mean, we look at things in US, Europe, UK. We look at markets. I mean, USA, they had major cutbacks in 2022. So around about the mid part of 22 was when a lot of the US companies, and we could see the jobs begin to be removed from the platform. And it kind of, what it's like when the US catches a cold, Europe get it later. You could see it become in Europe and UK, jobs began to come off the platform a bit later than the US. So it is interesting. We do look at regional trends, and I've got a couple more things I can pull out today from some of the work that we've looked at. But I think what's interesting is when you look at jobs, the job side of the marketplace, what's interesting is that remote jobs they've halved on the platform. So 7 out of the 9 remote locations that we have, the jobs that have been tagged as remote have halved. This is, you talk about in your newsletters every week about return to office RTO. What's interesting is the impact of that was similar in Europe and the UK compared to the US. So it's kind of like this is happening. There's a lot of global companies, but also companies that are in these markets are opting for the same thing. But as I'll come on to what the candidates are interested in, it's not necessarily what the candidates are wanting. So there is this tension here, which exists. But it's definitely, I often alluded it. It's like trying to get the toothpaste back into the tube. Like, how do you do it?
Can I just add something in here, which is quite interesting, in that I recall from the Firefish recruitment, like 2024 study, reading, which was in the newsletter at the weekend. It said more recruitment organizations are allowing their people to work from home first and in the office occasionally. There is less full-time in office than there was each year so far, which is not what I was expecting. So that's actually the opposite of what you're saying, Finn, about tech workers. Which, I mean, I'm not contradicting what you're saying at all. I'm just saying it's really interesting that actually the reverse has happened for recruiters, as recruitment agencies seem to have become a bit more enlightened over the last couple of years.
I would say that's very much a caveat on agencies. I mean, because in-house, I think it's literally disappeared. I mean, guys, let me know what you think out there. If you're looking for work, are you seeing remote recruiter jobs? You rewind back 2022, that was the thing. Everyone was like, people were dropping the flexible working as one of the big USPs, as this is going to really align with your values. But I think that market seemed to have disappeared in 2023. Every recruiter job I saw that was on the Brainfood jobs job board was on premise. And I think for us, internal recruiters have gone in. Now, I think the Firefish report was predominantly on agency side. So I wonder whether
it was an agency, it was all in-house.
In-house.
Well, it is. I'm just gobsmacked. Yeah, I was just gobsmacked at that recruitment agencies were not having people like in the in the hot room, in the boiler room.
Boiler room, banging it out, banging the calls
Exactly.
out.
Maybe it's because recruiters are like lone wolves. A lot of them, they're used to building a desk on their own. I mean, I don't know. I speak to some recruiters, and I often don't think it's the collaboration thing that you get. One thing that's interesting just with the roles that we've got, and this is something that's slightly concerning for people entering the industry, is that when you look at the seniority of roles, I mean, we have roughly a third of the candidates on Otta are entry level, like 0 to 2 years. A third are mid, like 3 to 5 years, and then a third are like 5 years or expert, 9 years and above, right? So we cover all ranges, and the entry level and mid level roles were most affected. When you look at the roles that have been affected, so expert roles, those with like 9 years plus experience, they're the far least. So when companies are thinking about investing, essentially they're saying, in the past where we can get a lot more young talent into the business, they're holding back, they're not having as many headcount, and obviously they're trying to just get more experienced people in. But this is a problem for the industry. If you're trying to get into tech at the moment, it's a harder climate for sure.
That's really interesting because and I've heard again anecdotally, you know, if you're out of a boot camp as a developer, a career changer, let's say, or whatnot, 2023 was actually a really tough year because companies felt, maybe rightly or wrongly, but they felt there was more candidates out there in the marketplace, and that led them not to have to look at candidates that they would otherwise feel that they needed to train more or to, you know, handhold for a year or two or whatever. So yeah, it's getting in on tech has turned into a harder thing. You know, the golden era of choosing a very high salary, remote, whenever you work, wherever you want, seems to have receded very quickly there. Interesting. What type of jobs on platform, Finn, can we talk about? So tech is a big term, but can we dive into that and say, you know, are there particular types of tech jobs that were more or less prominently lost on the market last year compared to what the years before?
Yeah, so there have been some changes. I mean, what was interesting, 2022, the second half of the year, we started seeing a lot of talent jobs come off, and I can cover a little bit about where we are on that in a second. But in 2023, we definitely saw a reduction in some of the technical roles. So this is for us, technical software engineering, data, product. And we had a 45% drop in these roles across the platform. So some areas were less affected, like operations and sales. I mean, I think when business is tough, people still need great commercial people. But yes, certainly there have been some changes in categories over the years. But I often say to companies, like, still the best people, they still have choices. And they're still looking for companies that really match them in terms of what they can offer. And you know, for many of the best candidates, they're not just like, they're only going to move for really the right job. And that's what we try and do, surface these great jobs, these gem jobs to people.
Yeah, very interesting. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, there was one area I just wanted to cover out about jobs, which I thought was quite interesting. And the point I was going to make is that salaries transparency has moved, but only in America. And obviously, we know that the Americans have put legislation in, and I just think it's another really obvious example where regulation moves the market. So to give you an idea, the proportion of roles on Otta that had a public salary in 2023, it nearly doubled, so 43% of all jobs. And obviously, in the US, it went from 30% to 62%, which is great. But in the UK, there was little to no change. And that was the same for virtually Europe. So we're one of the sort of only job search platforms that actually, our algorithm is set up that if you actually put public salaries on your jobs and you commit to responding to candidates, we actually give you enhanced visibility. We actually give you more views because we think that you deserve them. So I just think it's interesting that, as I said, I know some of the bans on the roles are really big in America and people are kind of hacking it, but I just want to say it is a good example of where regulation can move the market. And obviously, I think companies who are still burying their head in the sand around this, they've got to start looking at it this year.
No, but that's very interesting. I think generally welcome. I think most of us have a feeling. In fact, that was actually a survey question in what do recruiters want? Like, what is your opinion on salary transparency? And broadly, most of us were in favor, about 2/3. So I think generally speaking, we feel this is a good thing. And EU pay directive certainly is taking an effect I think it was agreed in law last year. It takes effect this year. So that's the EU will take care of. UK, of course, operates as some sort of outlier of what the heck are we going to do? I don't know. But I presume we're going to fall into line here. I can't imagine us being sticking in a non-transparent way. So yeah, hopefully we'll see that. Excellent stuff. Go ahead.
So I think, what's interesting is some of the work that my teams do with our customers, like take Hannah Briscoe and the team at OVO Energy. They put a case study to their exec team using some of the data that we had that opted for doing a pilot of public salaries on their jobs on Otta. And they've now made it policy. They won the argument with the exec team by using data to say, this is going to save us time because people who are applying, we can afford, and they're opting in. And it just, I know there are politics in bigger companies with this sort of stuff, but I think one of the things that TA people can show leadership is by putting together a very quick pilot and test and actually being able to go back to data. Because I'll give you an example. The average viewing time on a job on Otta is 17 seconds. So people spending 17 seconds reading about a company, learning about a job. When you start adding the things that candidates want to see, like salaries, it jumps up even higher. And so you're getting this deep engagement, and it just makes the whole recruitment process so much easier. So it's something which I just think people can say too difficult, not going to bother. I just think people in your community need to probably be thinking about it. And I said, we're happy to talk and share examples of companies that are making progress here.
Yeah, I wonder whether sort of salary, like jobs that don't have a salary declared on it will be similar to finding, property that doesn't have a value on it at some point. Like, are you even gonna click on it if it doesn't tell you how much they want? It's like, it's a waste of time. That you don't have the time necessarily to negotiate. So I think this is happening. And Michael, thanks for sharing that. I think Darren's been great with publishing stuff, and we do actually know why companies don't publish salaries. It's not a straightforward yes no. It's easier if you're a younger company with less people basically and less legacy. But we do know if you've been around a 100-year company, you know what, you're going to have a dozen compensation plans and reviews in that period of time, and everyone is off beam. So there's huge cultural reworking need to be done. But if things like the Pay Transparency Directive takes place, it's going to be forced on you. And so that I think is going to be a big HR project for this year, rationalizing comp. And that will increase liquidity in the market. Some people are going to say, look, I ain't taking this new deal, I'm out. So it's going to increase fluidity. Cool. Okay. Let's talk about candidate behavior. In fact, no, let me not guide you on this, Finn. What was the next thing that you wanted to discuss?
Well, the final thing I just want to say on jobs, because I asked the team to look, because I know most of your audience are in TA and recruitment. It's just to say, look, we have 1,300 HR and recruitment roles in the platform today, but it is 28% fewer jobs than last year. So when we were prepping for the call, you said, tell the audience what it is. And it obviously there are fewer jobs. But I just wanted to say that there are new jobs coming live every day on Otta or every week. So it's difficult for us to predict where we are in this kind of tech winter of jobs. We look at the jobs every week, but the candidate activity is up. And that's probably what I'll lead with next. So I've covered what's happening on the job side of the marketplace. Why don't I tell you what's happening to candidates? Because one of the things we look at is, how many applications are they making? How does this differ across the world? And what's really interesting as an Otta, our whole premise is about making people make fewer but better quality applications. So it's kind of like the opposite of easy apply. We try and actually put friction in the product so that you can't even view and apply for thousands of jobs. So what's interesting is that over last year, candidates actually make the same number of applications. So in the UK and EU, it's roughly 4 or 5, and in America, it's roughly 7 or 8. But the issue for your recruiters and TA people in the audience, they feel like it's a load more. It's not on Otta. Like, people are making the same number of applications, but there's more people, and then there's fewer jobs. So this is why they're getting this feeling of we're trying to reduce the noise, but there's definitely this macro view which is obviously playing out at times. So I think it's just worth knowing that that's kind of, it's not necessarily people making hundreds of applications. On actual average, the most common number the most common number of applications that someone makes on Otta is 1. right? And really, it's what we try and do is get people to find those gem jobs. But I mention it because I just think, yeah, there are more people in the market, and this is where TA people feel a bit of the pinch. But it's not necessarily with people making loads more applications. Certainly, that's what we see on our platform anyway.
No, that's really good to know, because obviously the volume of applications per candidate is some indication of motivation, I guess. You know, if you're a full-time job seeker, for instance, you're going to be highly motivated to have a very high applicant rate. That makes sense. But if you're kind of, you know, passively looking or just looking here and there, you're going to be super selective and just shooting one or two things out there. So what you're saying is basically no real increase per person. There's simply more people looking. Or more people on platform, and then there's less opportunities correspondingly, so the overall applicant rate has gone up. That's very interesting. Oh, by the way, Finn, go on.
No, you go.
No, I've been banging on at some at risk of boring the audience about AI-enabled candidates, you know, increasing apply rate per person. But I assume that's actually going to be more difficult within a closed system like Otta, isn't it? You can't apply from outside the system, as I understand.
So the way we work is that some companies we have with ATS integrations, you can apply directly on Otta, and I mean, obviously there's a box where you can put almost like a sort of mini cover letter. I mean, we have seen candidates using AI to write this, and you know, just building on your discussion earlier, Chance, what I find interesting is that hiring myself is that the problem with using AI to write a kind of cover letter for a note is that you get all these applications that all read exactly the same. And you know, in our business, I just think if you're trying to apply for a fast growth company, if you really don't want to sound like everyone else who's applying for that fast growth company, you want to sound as though you've done some thinking. And I don't mind the use of tools, but what I think is that people think they're being smart using these tools, when in actual fact, the danger is they're not able to stand out because people can begin to work out, oh, this sounds exactly like these three other ones, and then there's one candidate who's written something really quite bespoke. And I think that's my only thing about people. Yeah, you are able to use AI, and there's always a role for it, but I just think that nuance is candidates need to be mindful of that.
I would say that nuance applies to recruiters as well. If you're banging out the AI composed messaging, that's all well and good because it's saving you some typing time, but I think it's a very short window of opportunity where the receiver starts cottoning onto it and think this is sounding the same. And remember, by the way, all of these artificial intelligence services are trained on historical data, so it's inevitably going to sound the same because it's going to go with what is most likely been said before. So if you're looking for unique or innovative ways of putting it, you've got to instruct it specifically that way to kind of subvert itself rather than go with the initial recommendation. So yeah, thanks for the question. I'll raise this, by the way, for everyone. If everyone's got any questions that you want specifically Finn to answer, put it in the Q&A on the sidebar and we'll go to them towards the end of the chat. By the way, folks, I've realized time as well. It's just been fascinating listening to Finn wax poetical on this, but we're kind of we're 45 minutes in. So now is a good time to take a mini break because we always want to make sure that Brainfood Live is a conversation starting show, not a conversation ending one. And of course, we do have to come off air in due course. And it would be a terrible shame if we were to do that. And there's people out there that want to continue the conversation in some other form. So now is the time to basically grab your LinkedIn URL, share it in the chat stream if you're watching this on Crowdcast. If you're watching this on any LinkedIn threads out there, whether you're watching an Adam's show or Finn's LinkedIn or my LinkedIn, put your LinkedIn in the comment thread there, and then just connect to everyone you see do the same. You should just walk out of this with a supercharged network of 30, 40 people that are interested in this conversation, tech hiring, state thereof 2024. Okay, Finn, let's get on to the next thing, man.
Yeah, by all means. So I think what's interesting, you kind of touched there around passive and active candidates. And I think a lot of people think that you have to use recruiters to get to the passive candidates. And we've found that we've actually, when people sign up to Otta, we ask them, we say, are you actively looking or are you just actually not just browsing really? The funny thing about it is that we find that the people who say they're not actively looking, they get hired at pretty much the exact same rate as the people who say I'm active. And the funny thing about the difference, the reason we think this to be true is because we did some qualitative research with candidates, and they said things like, yeah, I wasn't actually looking, I was just having a browse to see salaries, am I being paid the right amount for my role and level, and then I saw this dream job at this company and I applied and I got hired. So that is one of the sort of discovery things which we drive. But the difference between last year and this year on passive and active is actually, it's meaningful. So to give you an idea, in 2023, in 2022, roughly 1 in 4 candidates was making an application. Okay, and then last year it's closer to 1 in 2. So it's just around about 45%. So as I said, people make fewer applications on Otta. 80% of the audience make 10 or less. But the other really interesting thing with our marketplace is there's a stark difference between the amount of jobs that Americans apply for and, say, the UK and Europeans. And we really, we don't have concrete evidence in this, but we believe one of the theories is that in America, you're kind of trained from a young age. Yes, you can go and do that job. Yes, you maybe don't have all the things, but actually, yes, you've got most of them. Like, definitely go and apply for it. And as a result, I think there's a sort of cultural thing about applying for jobs and thinking you can have a shot at them, which actually does create a bit of a noise in the American part of the market.
That's interesting. And I think that's true. I mean, again, we have to unfortunately lean into some stereotyping. I hope our American friends aren't upset with us on that. But I think it's right. I think there's a lot more. It's to the credit of the American culture that there's a little bit more risk taking and, let's give it a shot type of approach. But I also think it's got something to do, a great deal to do with, things like notice periods and at-will contracts and what have you. So maybe job insecurity is definitely higher in the US than it is elsewhere in Europe and in other places in Europe. And that basically is a liquidity thing. So if you're on an at-will contract, you're going to be thinking all the time, aren't you, about, boss can just tell me to leave tomorrow and I'm done. Whereas in France, you got 3 months, even more, and there's a procedure that you need to go through, and there's much more forewarning, which basically doesn't put you quite as much on edge. So I think there's push and pull on that issue there. Very, very interesting. Okay, cool. Yeah. Anything? Go ahead.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So just talking a little bit more about candidates, what we find interesting is that when people sign up to Otta, we ask them what they're really optimizing for in their job search, and what's interesting is that the number one thing hasn't moved over the course of the year. So the number one thing is flexibility and well-being. So basically over 60% of people who sign up for Otta say that's their number one. And then it comes down to like working with great people and then development and progression. And I just think it's interesting that, what I said about remote jobs dwindling or diminishing and then people saying, but actually flexibility is still number one. Like, I think companies need to be smart about how they kind of square this circle, if you will. And one of the things we did at Otta last year was we realized we couldn't pay everyone like the top tier salary. Like we're a Series A startup. So what we did, we surveyed the employees and they said to us, actually, we want more flexibility. So rather than getting people to buy more holidays days off, we did a pilot of a 9-day fortnight, Hung. So we get every second Friday off. The whole company's off. There's no Slack and there's no emails, right? So we've done this as a way, so we didn't think moving to a 4-day work week was appropriate to give everyone 20% of the time back, but we did 10%, and we've made it work, and we've made it work with, maintained productivity, which was the goal, and ultimately our staff are a lot happier. So when I think about flexibility and well-being, and okay, it's easier for a smaller business like ours, but I do think that what you've got to do is if you can't compete on areas like salary, can you compete in other areas? And I think we'll see more businesses moving in this direction.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think those two elements might be aligned as well in a contingent way, in the sense that if employers are kind of pulling back on remote, and that's expressed on the posted jobs that we see in Otta, but obviously lots of companies that aren't posting jobs may have made the RTO policy, that may then trigger employees to suddenly elevate flexibility as a priority concern. If, for instance, you're used to working and you now enjoy remote, your company's called you back to office, you think, oh, right, where's my old Otta account? It's like, let's fire this one back up. I think that's obviously going to happen, right? So yeah, it's an interesting interplay between where we're at, and there is that tussle between employer and employee as to who wins out on this. Okay, very, very interesting. Go ahead.
Yeah, so maybe that links in nicely to like the third section of kind of what our team have been looking at. So I've covered salaries and what the companies are doing. I've covered what the candidate behavior is, but like let's talk about it, what it means for people in your audience, the recruiters here. So the thing I always say to companies is there's a really big difference between the companies that get the most applications on Otta and the cream of the talent and those that don't. Okay, so what do they do? Okay, because fundamentally they have different behaviors and they're leaning into the things that candidates care about. Okay, so I'd give you an example, just building on the flexibility theme that we just talked about. Like, it's not enough to say hybrid working. Okay, so what you need to say is if it's 2 to 5 days in the work, that needs to be clear at the top of the job or not. It needs to be clear. Where is the office? Okay, we've got a great small business called Hook on the platform, and they basically say they say, look, the whole team is in the office Tuesdays and Fridays, and the rest you work where you want. We don't do finish times. We have a company culture of minimizing meetings. Everyone's a key to our standing private offices. You can use them 24/7, and that's a really, really clear hybrid policy. You know, it's one of the best, and their employees rate it 9.5 out of 10 for flexibility. So I do think when people say, okay, well, yeah, we're flexible or we're hybrid, I'm like, no, job seekers want to know really, like, what does that mean? And you have a canvas to do that. And the companies that are doing this, as I said, they perform much better. So I just think, I know some companies it's different between teams and departments, and I think you need to go to that level when you're trying to attract the best talent.
That's a really, really good point. Sorry, Adam, go ahead.
I think that's exactly the same. That's for exactly the same reason as the salary transparency, isn't it? They want to, I mean, if there's ambiguity in the way that you're positioning the offer, then they're like, move on. I don't have time to find out. It's just exactly the same as any sales process. If the buyer's got questions, the chances of them moving on are higher.
Yeah, remove the question is what you're saying, Adam, and I think you're right. You've got to you can't just say we're hybrid. Like, have you thought about what that means? How does it manifest in the office? What happens? You know, the absolute clarity of it. And again, it's not a judgment, moral judgment as to how hybrid you are. It's just like, are you clear on what your expectations on your staff are and what feel like the social contract is? And then people can self-sort. You know, you can decide for yourself whether this fits you. Sometimes it doesn't. I remember old mate of mine, you know, loved working shift work. You know, I would have hated that, but he loved basically walking around London when no one was around, and you know, being able to have free time during the day. Wasn't much of a night owl. Happy to say, right, I'm doing my nights, I don't care. Whereas that wouldn't have suited a lot of other people. So to each their own. Just be clear what it is. That's a really, really good tip. What other tips have you got for us, Finn, on effective hiring that you've learned from Otta?
Yeah, so I think one of the other things that a lot of the companies who do really well on Otta is they're leaning in to tell candidates what they're doing on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we have a section of the job card where companies can really say with real degree of honesty around what they're doing. So you don't get a lot of companies say, oh, we're striving to do this. You actually get people who say, these are the things that we've implemented. These are the things we're trying. And these are the policies, whether it's parental leave, whether it's flexibility. It's really kind of leaning into the fact that diversity is something which people want to know. They want to understand that they're thinking about joining a company that is forward thinking and progressive in a lot of occasions. And I think what's interesting is that we find that on Otta, like 53% of the candidates on Otta are women. Okay, and we're a tech hiring platform, and even in technical categories like software engineering and data, like 2 out of 5 of every applicant is a woman. So we've built this platform, and it's because there's lots of little things that we do. Like when people sign up, we remind women that they typically set their salaries 15% lower than men. And we urge them to actually, you know, make sure that they are setting the right salary. And because unfortunately, Hung, there is a very learned behavior that if you're a female software engineer, when you are at entry level in your career, you set your salary about 8% lower than men, but it's a learned behavior. When you're 9 years at expert level, you set your salary 20% lower than your male counterparts. So again, what we're trying to do is tell candidates of all different, obviously we've got ethnicities and gender, is that there are biases. We're trying to call it out, and we're trying to help candidates. And what we see is that we have a much higher degree of diverse candidates using our platform to try and find work.
That's really impressive. I was very surprised to hear 53% candidate, sort of female candidates on platform. That's massive, particularly as what we know. And I know you're not exclusively tech, but well, from what we know of the tech environment, which is majority male, let's say. So well done on that. Good place, folks, if you're hiring and diversifying your teams. It seems that there's lots of reasons to be on the platform. Okay,
we've got a
cool.
long way to go. Yeah, we've got a long way to go, Hung. But I just think there are things that companies can be doing, and I think the only other thing that I just really call out to people on is speed. And being responsive and being able to get back to people timely. And like, I know that you made a good point in your newsletter this week around recruiters being very stretched, but I think one of the things that we're trying to do is, in terms of trying to reduce the noise, I'll give you an example. Our paid customers, our pro customers, they have ability to source on Otta, so they can ping outbound companies in the back end. And we find that for every candidate, when they sign up, we actually encourage them to put things that are not on the CV. So like, really, we ask them questions like, what is it you really want in your next role, and what are you most proud of? And actually, we have this little yellow box next to a candidate where you really get an insight into what their mindset is. And what we find is that when you get people who actually use that information to ping a candidate and not just use a cut and paste thing, you will find that your response rates can be north of 75%. And I think we've got Michael from Equitas on the webinar, and he's found this out. Like, if you use this type of insight to get through to someone, you can send much fewer messages, and it's so much more efficient. So it's the kind of thing where I just think, like, I think some people think recruitment is this numbers game and it's pipeline. And I think what we're sort of quietly proving is that you can reduce the funnel in various places, and sort of less is more, essentially.
You know what? That's an amazing bit of innovation there. Just to ask the candidate what is not on your CV that you really care about. Like, why hasn't LinkedIn done that? Do you know what I mean? It's like all of these generic messages just been piling out, but it just takes, and any organization can look at this and make it immune from being scanned or whatever it is. So it doesn't, it's not part of the search system, but it forces a human reader to read that piece. Maybe it's just a picture instead of text. A text of a picture instead of text, and then it forces, again, some thought into the email, and that's going to be the big differentiator in this AI-enabled world we're heading towards. People are going to resonate more with, what, I see this. I mean, everyone is getting AI messages now. I think we're all receiving these, and we're all seeing those in comments and stuff. No, I can't respond to that. I mean, immediately it's an insult to do so now. So we're already at the point where AI start disabling the engagement rate. To be able to say something very custom, very specific would be right there. Fantastic. Listen, Finn, we have to go quick. Go on.
Yeah, just very last thing for everyone in your audience. Two things I just wanted to say to people who were listening. Number one, if you're not on Otta today and you're eligible in terms of you've got jobs in the locations we have, we can give you a free trial. It is finlay@otta.com. And secondly, for those of you who are on the platform, we're willing to have little mini consultations with our product experts, no obligations, just to help you to learn how you can be a top performing company, because there's this wide discrepancy. It's much better for the whole industry, better for candidates, better for companies, if we can just get this humming a bit more effectively. So the offer is there, and honestly, we'd be glad to help out.
That's fantastic. I mean, just reach out to Finn on LinkedIn. Finlay, is it finlay.otta?
Finlay@otta.com. I think I can ping it in the chat just now.
Yeah, ping it in the chat, get free consultation, free advice, and a free go on otta.com. Why not? Okay, we haven't forgotten about the questions. We're going to jump to them real quick as you type that in. I don't think there's that many, but we'll go to the first one. This is John Rose. John is saying, what are you seeing as conversion rate from applicant to candidate interview by client on Otta? Okay, conversion rate from applicant to candidate interview. Do you have a raw stats for us there?
I mean, I haven't got it to hand. John, I'd be happy to go and dig it away. The only thing I do know is that it does vary depending on how the customer segment. So whether it's startup or whether it's SMB or a large company. So I'll happily come back to me if you ping me. I can answer you. But it's in general on Otta, it's fewer but better quality. Like someone like Funding Circle in the UK fintech, they said, look, we offer 1 in 3 candidates from Otta that we actually interview. So there is this idea that they're getting fewer but better quality people through, and ultimately hiring them. So yeah, I can dig that out.
You'd expect
fantastic.
if the average person's applying for one job, then they're doing a pretty discerning kind of job on that, and they're probably getting it's going to be a high ratio.
The average is under 10, I think, but the most common number is 1, Adam. So that's probably the best way to think about it.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, Finn, listen, we'll let you go on this. Thanks for doing all of the extra yards on this. This is not like part of the deal. It was just like, okay, this is interesting, and Finn went ahead and just dove into it. Thanks to the data science team as well for doing extra stuff. But I think everyone can agree, fascinating to find that information out, and also how the platform kind of adds those nuances, which really helps candidate and employer alike. So great stuff. Okay, Finn, listen, I hope to catch up with you soon, man, but we'll let you go at this point. Have a good weekend, man.
You too. See you later, gents. Bye for now.
That was interesting, really interesting, and really good to do this. By the way, folks, what is your idea on us doing more of these types of formats? Because obviously, Brainfood has loads of companies that want to get involved, want to sponsor the platform. My previous view is, look, this is a discussion-based show. We want to have topics and all that. We're still going to do that as base, but I'm really interested to know from a platform like what is actually going on behavior-wise. Because that tells us a lot that we don't get from thought leaders, right? I've been writing a lot of thought leadership. Guys, it's speculation as far as I can tell you. Honest speculation, but it is speculation. But when you be able to draw data from the likes of this, I think it's quite interesting. So yeah, I might drop a few more of these things in future. But okay, folks, listen, we're on time, so we have to let you go. Thanks for watching, everybody. We're back next week. We are talking about how to measure quality of hire in the age of AI. So number one, how to measure quality of hire. We don't know how to do that. Most of us don't anyway. But the additional twist is, what does it mean when everybody is AI enabled? Number one, can we use AI to help us measure quality of hire? Has anyone done this? Has anybody tried to apply technology to improve how we understand a good hire is a good hire? Secondly, what does it mean in terms of job performance if we now have AI versus non-AI enabled candidates? Do we put our sort of sales targets up? Has anyone done that as a result of saying, you know what, I think AI is going to help you make that number? Is that even fair? And how do we do it? Has it changed how we measure quality of hire? So make sure you follow the channel if you want to get more information on this, and register for the show. It is live and up. We've got some amazing guests for us to talk us through that one. All right, that's it, folks. I'll see you next week, same time. Cool.
At what point does it become paralysis by analysis? So here's the example. You've just said, like, should we be looking at using AI to work out quality of hire? How about we use AI to assess the AI methods that we're using to assess the quality of hire?
Yeah,
at what point do we need to get on with the job? At what point do we just need to bang the phones?
No, I totally get what you're saying. That there is a point. There is like, how do you judge the balance? And there probably is like a number. Like there is, or shall we say, a percentage? Like, what percentage of time do you spend analyzing anything? Hey, there's a book I read when I was a kid. Now, I probably shouldn't have read it as a kid because it's a bit dark. But it's called Hagakure, The Way of the Samurai, right? The Book of the Samurai. And it was all these like collected sayings of these Bushido warriors and what have you. And all of it's insane because obviously the samurai are really a death cult, and they're not they're not a sort of a path that I think you want to follow in this day and age. However, one of the very quick things that they said, one of the writers said, which is really interesting, was if you're struggling to make a decision, you should make that decision in 7 breaths, no more than that, because the reason why you don't know. Like, you can take another 70 breaths, but you're not going to be any further in your dilemma. So you have a dilemma. presumably you've already gathered as much information. There's a reason why you have a dilemma, because you've gathered like 50% here, 50% there. You don't know. It's like it could go either way. So you just got to make the decision within an artificial time frame, because you could take another day. It's not going to help. Or worse, you could just infinitely put off the decision until the circumstances just reveal themselves to you. And that's the example of not making a decision, is having the decision having the circumstances be forced upon you. And that's a bad habit I've got. I neglect, I should deal with that. Don't deal with it, leave it. And then eventually whatever terrible thing that I wanted to avoid happens. And I think, all right, that's happened. Whereas it would have been better, I just made a decision. Even if it goes wrong, it's better to make the decision early, because you feel better about it. You feel more decisive. Feel more. Your morale improves by having made that decision. So anyway,
yeah, definitely. What time?
What are you doing this weekend, mate? Eh?
What time is it?
What? For you?
What time is it?
For me?
For you.
11 o'clock. It's not that late.
So is it bedtime, or are you going out for dinner now?
No, I've already had dinner, and I'm in the village right now, so it's like there's nothing to do. It's finished, and I'm still a bit jet lagged, so I'm knackered. So I'll close this off. Next week I'll be back to normal, but I want to keep UK time, because probably might want to sneak in maybe a weekend show when I'm Asia Pac as well, because I do know Asia Pac is mega neglected simply because I'm usually in Europe. So yeah, I'll look to do something Aussie, and maybe do a how to hire in the Philippines or something.
Cool.
Might be quite interesting to do. All right, listen, I'll let you go, mate.
Cheers. Bye.